Big Ten Media Days just concluded this afternoon, and today I want to go through day one of what 7 Big Ten coaches said about their teams and tie it in with some of my own thoughts and questions regarding each Big Ten team. So I'm going to spend probably 3 to 4 minutes on each team, each head coach, and what they said, just talking about their team, going through my own thoughts on what they said, trying to interpret what they were saying, or in some cases just discussing why there's frankly no point in even trying to process what they said, because it is just a preview, it's just what they're saying, and you can't always take people's words on certain situations. It's going to be virtually impossible for all of these coaches to have winning seasons. So despite the fact that most, if not all of them, display confidence, look good, have great things to say, there is a great chance that one, if not more than one of these coaches are in for a not-so-good 2022 campaign. Of the 7 teams that we're discussing today, 2 of them have coaches that I think are on the hot seat in Scott Frost for Nebraska and Tom Allen for Indiana. So sit back, relax, enjoy the show. If you're new to this channel, or if you've been watching for a while but haven't subscribed already, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button and comment your thoughts on this video and on Big Ten Media Days down below. And don't forget to like this video and hit that beautiful notification bell right beside the big old red subscribe button. Let's start off with Northwestern and what Pat Fitzgerald had to say at Big Ten Media Days. They're picked to finish 7th in the West Division, just a few votes below the Illinois Fighting Illini. And their coach, Brett Bielema, spoke today, so tomorrow I'll run down Illinois and what I thought about what they said. Pat Fitzgerald is a fascinating coach. He's one of the best players in Big Ten history. I think one of the best, if not the best player in Northwestern school history as he played there. And he is just, he's quite the guy. Quite the genius, I would actually argue. In the past 4 seasons, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021, in 2 of those years his team won the Big Ten West, and in 2 of those years his teams went a fantastic 3-9 in 2019 and in 2021. The transfer portal, Fitzgerald talked about it a little bit, and how losing guys like Brandon Joseph and other big playmakers can certainly hurt, but he has no issue with it, as he's always supported players being able to take on a possibly better opportunity. And he also spoke about NIL and how Northwestern is getting into the NIL landscape, looking into the Chicago business landscape and giving their players some opportunities and such. But at Northwestern, Fitzgerald's job is a very tough job. It doesn't have a lot of talent. And all these new changes to college football are something that is not going to help a small private school like Northwestern. It's just not going to help them. They bring back Evan Hull and Peter Skoronski. I think those are their 2 best players. Skoronski's on the offensive line as an offensive tackle, is probably the best offensive lineman in the Big Ten in total, and Evan Hull is a very good running back. There's questions at quarterback and on the offense and on the entirety of the defense, really, with losses via the portal and poor play at quarterback, Ryan Helinski, for example, and there's just a lot of questions surrounding Northwestern, lots of mystery, and I don't think Northwestern is going to have a good year this year. I have them going 3-9 again, but there's a part of me, and it's the same with another team we're going to discuss. There is a part that itches at my mind that thinks that Northwestern is just going to find a way to shock everyone, because there's lots of mystery surrounding this team. Pat Fitzgerald is a good coach. They're one of 3 Big Ten teams that didn't lose their head coach, offensive coordinator, or defensive coordinator. So there's a lot of staff continuity. Pat Fitzgerald knows what he's doing, period. Amen. He's an excited, tough, physical guy. There's an argument for him to be the best coach in the Big Ten. I'm excited to see what his program does this 2022 season, and it all opens up against a team that I'm very high on in the Nebraska Cornhuskers in Dublin, Ireland. Let's talk about Indiana. Picked to finish 7th in the East Division. So 2 of the teams who are assumed to be the bottom feeders of the conference were talked about Tuesday. Allen is a coach that was coming off of a fantastic 2020 campaign. Many, including myself, looked and were like, whoa, we have a new great coach here. We have someone that no one saw coming and has turned Indiana, which for all intents and purposes has been a very bad program for the past several decades, into something. And then last year happened. They went 2-10, 0-9 in conference, and really after their game against Michigan State in October, the team just completely fell apart, and they were riddled with injuries almost from the beginning. Michael Penix, I'd make the argument that Michael Penix was never healthy, and the way he played in the Iowa game, the Cincinnati game, the Penn State game, before he was out for the year, just indicated that he really wasn't healthy, or that his supporting cast was just so bad that it really didn't matter. But Tom Allen has reflected on 2021. That's what I caught from his media day speech, I guess, and answering questions. That's what I caught on to, is that he's reflecting on 2021. He said that, when you get beaten down, this is me paraphrasing, but when you get beaten down and when you fail, you either feel sorry for yourself or you reflect and you fix the problem and move forward. And it sounds simple, almost trivially simple, but it's true. It's absolutely true. And Tom Allen, by firing Nick Sheridan, by a great majority of his players entering the portal, and then him bringing in guys through the portal like Connor Bazelak, quarterback from Missouri, who was the SEC Freshman of the Year in 2020, you have a chance to do something. And like Northwestern, I'm not necessarily sure. I don't know what to think about Indiana. There's teams like Illinois and Rutgers, which I'm pretty confident because of moves that they've made in the portal and because of other things like Brett Bielema just, being Brett Bielema. Their offense doesn't look too good. They lost a ton of super seniors too. And then Rutgers, they're in a tough position. They have a tougher schedule than a lot of teams do, and the talent just isn't there yet. And they haven't utilized the portal, let's say, as much as Indiana has. Indiana living and dying by the transfer portal gives them a higher ceiling, but it does give them the same floor to spectacularly fail once again. I don't know what to think about Indiana. I can see them going anywhere from 2-10 again to 7-5 and beating one solid team, and Tom Allen making a name for himself again. But Tom Allen was confident. He was boastful of his players, and not in a negative way, but just talking about leadership and how losing Micah McFadden and other guys, hurts, but you just have to replace, and that he has a lot of great guys from both 2020 and 2021 making returns to the 2022 squad. Up next is Maryland, one of the first teams that we're talking about that I have going to the postseason. I have Maryland going 7-5, making a name for themselves and continuing to build off of their 2021 campaign. And something that Mike Locksley said that I really liked is, you typically think of when you go 7-6, 3-6 at Maryland, which was their first winning season in over half a decade, you think, well, let's build off of that. Well, the problem is 2022 is a completely new year compared to 2021. So it's this mindset of you gotta keep doing what you're doing, not just rebuilding off of 2021, but reloading, retooling, and not just building off 2021, but rebuilding from what you lost to. Maryland lost a lot of defensive players in the portal. Dante Demas was basically assassinated by Iowa last year, and he is back, seems to be healthy. Mike Locksley said that he expects Demas to be starting on week 1. And a theme that I got, talking about how Taulia Tagovailoa is the most underrated player in the country, that he manages himself better, which was a problem last year in games like Iowa, where you could tell that Iowa's defense mentally broke him. And talking about how Maryland's the deepest team he's seen at his time with the Terps, both as an assistant and a head coach, and that he doesn't really have a concern about the defense. He talked about how despite all the losses in the portal, he didn't even mention those losses, by the way, talked about the returning experience on the front seven and how the secondary has really impressed him, and that's a solid unit. He is warning not just of a good team, but of a deadly offense. Rakeem Jarrett, Dante Demas, the entire offensive line returning, all five, and Talia Tagovailoa returning, that's a deadly offense right there, a deadly passing attack. And it's a passing attack that, in my opinion, is going to score on every defense. It's going to. There's no Big Ten secondary that I think Maryland faces, or at least all but maybe one Big Ten secondary that Maryland faces that will hold Maryland's passing offense hostage. The question for Maryland is their defense going to be good enough to hold opposing teams from also scoring on them? Maryland is a team that I think will engage in plenty of shootouts, and I think that this works well with their deadly passing offense and improved offense overall. Loxley seemed to be very proud of his team and his staff. He had a pretty decent, and by decent I mean in length, had a pretty long in length opening statement talking about how proud he was of his team. That's when he mentioned that this was a deep Maryland team, and talked about his staff and how he thinks that this team is just heading in the right direction, basically. And I couldn't agree with him more there. Maryland, I think, is going to improve not only off of 2021, but in a way that Mike Loxley would probably prefer me to say. They're just going to be a better team than 2021, despite some losses, and despite the fact that this is a new year with new challenges. They're going to be better than they were last year. And now you got Iowa, a team that I think compared to Maryland is going to regress. I think that Iowa is due for finally a year where you're going to need to have some offense to work. Iowa the past 3 seasons, 2019, 2020, 2021, they had great seasons where they finished ranked in the AP top 25 with basically just great defense and good special teams. They're picked to finish second in the West Division too. They received, I think, 3 first-place votes for the West. Ohio State was the unanimous pick to win the conference. Ferentz, is concerned about college football's future. It makes sense seeing that, he's older. Change is hard when you're older for sure, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I do have my own concerns about the future of college football, and he was saying how he thinks he does too, honestly, and how he thinks that others, that's what I was trying to get to, how he thinks that more than just him have concerns about the future of college football. Mentioned how the game is just getting bigger, the players are young, and we sometimes forget that, and as the game is growing, the pressure on them grows too. Ferentz talked about development for not just the NFL, but for just life after football, talking about just sharing his blunt honesty about how most kids aren't going to get a chance to play football again after college, so preparing them in class, in the weight room, and in other aspects, mental, physical, and life outside of football, it's important to prepare them and to help them grow. He's excited to see growth and how his players do in fall camp, despite the loss of Charlie Jones, Tyler Goodson, Tyler Linderbaum, Dane Belton, just to name a few names that departed. And he mentioned something that was very interesting to me. The confidence in the QB room. Because Iowa's QBs last year were some of the worst in the Big Ten. Alex Padilla and Spencer Petras were insufferable to watch, whether you were a Hawkeye fan or not. I couldn't believe watching the Big Ten championship game and thinking to myself, how did Iowa get here with Spencer Petras overthrowing his receivers by like 10 yards? It was phenomenal to me. The confidence in the QB room puzzles me not just because I think that it could be ridiculous, but because there could be some legitimacy behind it. John Budmeyer was hired from Colorado State, where he was fired last year. And Bud Meyer worked at Wisconsin from 2018 to 2020 and worked with Jack Cohn, worked with Alex Hornibrook a little bit, worked with Graham Mertz in the COVID year when Graham Mertz was younger. And I forget if Graham Mertz statistically regressed in 2021 from 2020 or he didn't. I don't necessarily remember that. But it's interesting because we all know and we can confidently say that Jack Cohn was the best quarterback in the Paul Chryst era. So I'm curious to see what Bud Meyer is going to do with Iowa's QB room, and if Iowa just gets some average QB play, because Ferentz, there might be some stubbornness with him, but a part of that I think is just the fact that he's ridiculously efficient and smart. He's been to Indy twice. He's nearly won Indy and reached the college football playoff in 2015, and he finds ways to win with just average or below average offensive performance, but great defense and special teams. And if Petrus just turns into an average QB, that's going to offset the loss of, Charlie Jones, Tyler Linderbaum, Tyler Goodson. It will offset those losses, and that can certainly put Iowa in a position to win the West again. So watch out for Iowa. I think they're going to go 7-5. They're going to have a season that's going to be very akin to, I think, the 2016 season, where they have some high expectations after doing well the prior year, but they fall short. But Kirk Ferentz is Kirk Ferentz. He's an underrated head coach. He knows what he's doing despite playing a style of football that is older and foreign to a lot of us. So watch out for Iowa, certainly. And a team that hasn't beaten Iowa yet, but a team that I think is higher, or that I'm higher on than Iowa, is the Minnesota Golden Gophers, who are picked third by the media to place in the West Division. I have them finishing second. I think I have Iowa finishing fifth in the West myself. The little part where it's talking about pick to finish in X place and X division is what the media has chosen, not my own prediction. Minnesota went 9-4. 9-4 in 2021. 6-3 in conference. Their one non-conference loss was to Bowling Green, which, to me is just a completely foreign concept. You lose to Bowling Green, and then you beat Wisconsin in a somewhat dominating fashion when Wisconsin was ranked in the top 15. It's crazy, but it describes what happens with Big Ten football. We see this happen to Big Ten West teams. I think excitement describes the 2022 Gophers. It doesn't just describe them, though. It also describes their head coach in PJ Fleck. PJ Fleck is a total players coach, a total culture guy, and a very underrated head coach. He talked about in his opening statement how appreciative he is of all of his players. No-nonsense guy, too. Some culture guys and some guys that just have that charisma, that X factor. Just they spew nonsense. PJ Fleck isn't that. He talked briefly about his family, saying hi to them. So PJ Fleck is just a very appreciative, selfless, awesome, energetic guy. It's one of the reasons I like him at Minnesota. Talked about how he's focusing on his players both on and off the field, physically, mentally, spiritually, financially, etc. He openly, not directly, but I think he openly dismissed the 2020 season because he was talking about how Minnesota had back-to-back 9-win seasons, or back-to-back full 9-win seasons for the first time since the 1900s. And that might sound strange to some. It sounded strange to me because I'm not someone who likes to dismiss the COVID year, but that's because it certainly affected some programs. Michigan, for example, the COVID year, I think, might have been a turning point in the Jim Harbaugh era. For Penn State, the 2020 year is something that I don't think Penn State has recovered from yet. And Minnesota proved that, well, the 2020 year was essentially a fluke. Going 9-4 in 2021 with several injuries at the running back position, the wide receiver position, and all that stuff, and having a bad OC in Mike Sanford Jr. is fascinating. That's a great coaching job by PJ Fleck. And Fleck has prioritized fixing the offense. It's why he hired back Kirk Ciarrocca after he departed for Penn State in 2020. After he was fired there, he worked for West Virginia as an offensive analyst. It's why he brought Ciarrocca back, to make the offense more balanced, to make it more versatile, to help Tanner Morgan improve. And Minnesota's defense, newsflash, they lost the majority of their D-line production, majority of their cornerback production. They return Mariano Sori-Marin at linebacker, and they return Tyler Nubin and Jordan Howden at secondary. But that defense has had significant losses. The offense needs to step up if Minnesota wants to have a shot to win the West, to be the best that they can be. And I think with Kirk Sherrod on the staff and what PJ Fleck is doing, the best Minnesota can be this year is the Big Ten West champions. So row the boat. Nebraska and Scott Frost. I actually took the most notes on this one. And yeah, part of that is because I'm very curious about Nebraska this year. Scott Frost is on the hottest seat in the country. But it's also because Scott Frost did something that I was a fan of. He had no opening statement. No opening statement. And that's not to say that opening statements are all bad. PJ Fleck's, for example, was fantastic. I loved it. But he had no opening statement. He just smiled and said, let's go to questions. And the questions that were asked of him were really good. It was fascinating because Pat Fitzgerald for Northwestern was talking about how you don't get too many questions when you're a 3-9 team. And here's Scott Frost just getting boatloads of questions, often relating to the same thing, like mental toughness, special teams, player mindset. But he's getting boatloads of questions. Nebraska was picked to finish 5th in the West by the media. I have them, as you know, winning the West. And like in most of my videos, I'm going to link my most recent Big Ten predictions video down in the description below. I encourage you to check that out. And I'm going to be making a final updated version within the next week or so, after probably the first week of fall camp, and we can get some news regarding that. Frost and the players, because I mainly watched Nebraska's player interviews because I just wanted to see how they were doing, because culture and team chemistry has been a problem at Nebraska for Scott Frost's entire tenure. They both had this almost unifying sense of confidence, and I liked that. And maybe that's not saying anything. I mean, there's a big chance Nebraska, they can go 3-9 or 4-8 again. They found a plethora of ways to do it last year. They can find a plethora of ways to do it this year. But there's a lot of reason for optimism for Nebraska this season. The confidence is one. The fact that Scott Frost, a criticism of him early on, and is that he would never take accountability. He took accountability for last year's season. When asked about the 3-9 season or talking about it, he said, first and foremost, we're a competitive team in 2021, and we could have, done better, reached a bowl game, or got close to winning our division, but we didn't. We disappointed ourselves. And first and foremost, that fell on him, then it fell on the coaching staff, and then it fell on the players. So him taking accountability is good. The focus on finishing games is good. He mentioned special teams, talked about that for a few seconds, and how he thinks it's the most. They've had the most athleticism that they've had at the special teams position that they've ever had in his tenure. He directly mentioned how he thought the players were getting better at coverage, and that made me laugh just thinking of how, his punter punted to the other side of the field in that Michigan State game, and the players, the Nebraska coverage unit, went to the other side of the field and basically let Jaden Reed get a punt return for a touchdown. So that made me laugh, as part of me felt like he was directly alluding to that. But it was still mentioned special teams. Him and his players seemed confident, focusing on finishing games. The one thing I didn't necessarily like, similar to Kirk Ferentz not being a fan of the future of CFB, or him speaking confidently about a staff on offense that could be incompetent, what I didn't like about what Scott Frost said partially was him not giving up play calling duties. You have Mark Whipple on your staff. He called it a collaboration. Well, newsflash, when coaches say collaboration with play calling, whether it's Jim Harbaugh when Gaddis was hired, whether it's Mark D'Antonio the late years, whether it's, Scott Frost in 2018, no matter who it is, it's not really a collaboration because the head coach has the final say. So it's going to be interesting seeing that Scott Frost is still sort of playing with what has been his team's downfall at moments, because he has been a poor play caller at Nebraska. I'm fascinated to see how much different the offense is despite the different offensive staff. That's not to say I'm going to be lower on Nebraska or much lower on them because of this. I like the confidence, the defense. The more I look at it, the more I'm impressed with it. But this is a reason for caution. Him not giving up play calling duties, but we'll see, because he also talked about how he wants to focus on other areas of the team. And I think specifically those areas are probably going to be team culture and some littler things like special teams too. Because if you can't do the little things, you can't do the big things. And finally, we reach Michigan, the Big Ten champions in 2021. They went 12-2, 8-1 in conference. They reached the college football playoff, and they're picked to finish second in the East Division by the media with no first place votes. Not a single media person has Michigan even winning their own division. Not a single one, which I find to be fascinating, because I look at this team, and yes, I'm a Michigan fan, but I remove the bias. Any potential bias I clean from my mind. This team's much better than the 2019 team could have ever been, and yet the 2019 team was somehow, favored to win the whole conference, and they ended up going 9-4. This Michigan team has a chance to, I don't think, be necessarily better than last year's unit overall as a team, but there's a part of me that thinks because of their more offensive focus, there's more of a chance for them to succeed against top-tier teams, against top 10 teams, because of the offensive nature of this team. And I think Ohio State, rightfully, is picked unanimously to win the whole Big Ten. When you look at what they return, their improvements by staff on defense with Jim Knowles coming in, but I'm shocked that Michigan, who's typically been favored by the media, I'm shocked that they didn't receive just one vote. Because going into Ohio State and beating that team and winning the division, let alone the entire conference, is hard, but this Michigan team can certainly do that with what they have on offense. There are clear goals being set. Harbaugh stating that the goals are to beat Ohio State and Michigan State in the same year, win the Big Ten, win the national title. Now, some may laugh at that, but Michigan's setting those goals, Ohio State's setting the same goals. I heard Ryan Day say today that, 11-2 in a Rose Bowl win isn't good enough at Ohio State, and it's not. And Mel Tucker, after losing Kenneth Walker and losing more than what many are saying, Mel Tucker is even saying the goal's to finish first. With a roster and all the injuries on the offensive line and some lack of depth, Mel Tucker's even saying we want to bring a championship to East Lansing. Having clear goals that are being set is so important for future success. And seeing that 3 Big Ten East coaches did that, this is going to be a very competitive division, as it has been, but it's going to continue to be that way. And Harbaugh seems to be focused on reloading, not rebuilding. But there seems to be a sense of optimism from him and from the players that Michigan is reloading. They are not rebuilding. They are plugging in. And that doesn't mean that the defense is going to have Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo again in, let's say, Mike Morris or Junior Colson. What that means, though, is that Michigan's defense, like I've said before, is probably not going to be an average or bad unit. They're probably going to go from what last year was a great, at moments an elite unit, to a good or just below great unit. Because they do have enough talent to not completely fall off there. And the offense, returning 8 starters from last year, they have the potential to reach that great to elite level, especially in the run game department. And I think aggression defines 2022 Michigan. And if it doesn't, then Michigan's at a interesting area, because with the defense they have and with what they return on offense, being aggressive is honestly probably the safer option. This sounds strange to say, but being aggressive with what they have on offense is probably the safer option than being conservative, seeing what they've lost on defense. So Michigan's going to be a fascinating case to watch in 2022. I think that they're going to go 11-1. Honestly, only lost to Ohio State. They can go 10-2. I could see them going 12-0, though that's unlikely. And Michigan, I think, is a team that is primed to at least have a good season in 2022, depending on what you define as a good season. But whether I'm being a Michigan fan or whether I remove my bias, I look at Michigan and I see optimism. And I like what's going on, at least in the immediate future. And that is all I have to say for this video. Michigan and Nebraska, they're for the media days that went on Tuesday, those were my two teams that I was honestly the most impressed by, that I had the most to take in, the ones that I wanted to talk about the most, especially seeing that outside of Ohio State, if you remove them from the equation, I think that those two teams are the best two teams in the Big Ten. Again, if you factor out Ohio State. And we're going to be talking about Ohio State and Michigan State, Penn State, and all the other teams that we didn't talk about today. All the teams that spoke at media days today, I'm going to be talking about tomorrow. So hit the notification bell so you can get notified when I post tomorrow's video discussing day 2 of Big Ten media days. Thank you all for watching this video. Let me know what you think about what the coaches said and my thoughts on Big Ten media days in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.